And joining us to kick off the show tonight is CIC Wealth Management Exec and CNBC contributor Malcolm Ethridge and StoneX Chief Market Strategist Catherine Rooney Vera. Malcolm, I feel like every night we're kind of saying, well, this company and the consumer missed, or this company's laying people off, and yet stocks just continue to make record highs.
Yeah, Brian, I think that the most important thing is that the Fed came out and told us, basically reassured us, that regardless of whether cuts happen in May, June, or July, we are going to see 3 by year end, and everything else doesn't matter. So whether the consumer is feeling a little bit stretched, especially for high dollar retail like Nike and Lulu, it doesn't necessarily matter for the broader markets, because all we've been focused on to this point, at least, is when is the Fed going to cut, not whether the Fed will cut.
Catherine, you agree that that's kind of all that really matters? I mean, I hate being so tied to the Fed, but maybe Malcolm's right.
Well, it's what matters to the market. But the question is, if in fact these headwinds turn into, reality, we've been expecting the consumer to pull back for some time, then the story changes. So I think that the market is really discounting the perfect landing that Powell had doubled down on from December's pivot party. This was like pivot party part 2. But if you look at some numbers, I'm talking to Mike Green tomorrow, non-mortgage personal interest outlays are exploding higher. This is rent, food, gasoline, non-mortgage personal income payments as a percentage of total income. That's all moving higher. We're talking like 41% of total income. So people are going to start pulling back here, and we're already seeing it. We heard from Darden's chief executive officer saying that the lower income consumer is already starting to pull back. We've seen it in Olive Garden's numbers. So I think that there are headwinds here. And I think that there are underpriced risks in the market that, to me, Brian, I've said this on your show before, it just makes perfect sense to me to at least take out some form of life insurance policy and hedge your bets with inexpensive options. Cash, T-bills. I think that is going to cut. It's going to be minimally, probably 50 basis points, maybe 75 basis points. But that's going to keep cash interesting, gold interesting, and I think defensive sectors as well as put options.
Catherine, quickly back to you. Talk about that insurance in sort of layman's terms, right? It's last call, right? We're not all market pros here. What do we do? Buy some out-of-the-money put option on the S&P 500 for 6 months out?
You can buy an at-the-money put option at 4.5%, thereabouts. That covers you 12 months out. And yes, that caps your upside, but at least it protects your downside in the event that we do see a culmination of headwinds really hitting the U.S. consumer, which is an underpriced risk at this point.
Yeah, because Malcolm, that's kind of my worry, right? And, our job here at this side of the desk and your side, too, with clients is kind of to worry, even as things do well. Because what if we get another red hot inflation number and suddenly those 3 rate cuts become 2 or they become 1? And if we are so beholden to the Federal Reserve cutting rates for stocks to go up, well, if we don't get the rate cuts, I think you see where I'm going.
I do. And I think you made the case that small caps finally had their day in the sun after a few days of kind of just hanging out in no man's land. And that's the part that concerns me the most as far as higher for longer, right? If inflation does decide to double back the way we're concerned it might, it's really going to have an impact on the small and mid cap sector. So the broadening that we're talking about may leave them behind, because higher for longer impacts those companies that have to borrow to grow. Your large companies, especially your mega cap techs, might be immune. But in that smaller sector, half the Russell 2000 isn't even profitable, right? So every month that Powell decides to keep rates higher, those floating rate loans they depend on to make payroll get that much harder to continue to keep.
So you think that's why, Malcolm, that small caps have really been outperforming in the last couple of months, because they are super reliant on interest rates and the Fed?
That's right. I think the market is basically placing its bet, trying to get ahead of where the puck is going, so to speak, and make sure that when those cuts come, they're in place for that run that inevitably happens in, the Russell 2000, for example. But I'm more concerned, to Catherine's point, about the opposite scenario where those cuts take a lot longer to come. And if you don't have that insurance policy, you're kind of just standing in the way trying to catch that falling knife. And
for the next segment, not this one, we got to go, guys. We're probably one Houthi missile away that hits a U.S. or U.K. destroyer from potentially a full-on war with Iran, and nobody seems to care. Catherine Rooney Vera, Malcolm Ethridge, thank you very much.